The weight of the sword, the year was 1624, deep in the Edo period, when the peace of the Tokugawa shogunate made the land quiet but not gentle. For low-rank samurai, peace was a different kind of battle. One fought not with enemy armies, but with hunger, debt, and the crushing demands of honor. Kenji Takahiro knew this too well. At 23, he wore the two swords of his station, but they were more a burden than a privilege. His hakama was patched in 3 places. His sandals were worn so thin the stones on the path bit at his feet. Yet he carried himself as a samurai should, straight-backed, eyes steady, voice calm. The villagers of Omiya did not see the hunger in his belly, nor the blisters on his hands from taking work unfit for a man of his rank. A samurai was not supposed to till the earth or mend roofs, but the stipend his lord granted him was barely enough for a week's rice, and so Kenji did what was necessary in secret. On this morning, mist hung low over the river. The air carried the scent of damp earth and pine. Kenji knelt before a small stone shrine on the edge of the village. His father's name was carved there, worn smooth by years of wind and rain. Takahiro Daichi had died with honor, cut down in the service of Lord Hayama during the Shimabara Rebellion. Kenji had been only a boy then, clutching his mother's hand as she tried to explain why father's body would never return home. He bowed deeply to the shrine, pressing his forehead to the cold stone. "Father," he whispered, "I will not shame your name." It was the promise he made every morning, even when his stomach growled loud enough for the crows to notice. The village was stirring now. Women in indigo yukata carried baskets to the river. Children ran barefoot between the huts, their laughter thin in the morning air. Old men squatted in the dust, warming their hands over small charcoal braziers. Kenji walked toward the main road, his swords at his side. To an outsider, he might have seemed a man of purpose, perhaps on his way to carry out a lord's order. In truth, he was heading toward the market, hoping to take on the day's work carrying loads for merchants who needed extra hands. It was dangerous for a samurai to be seen doing labor meant for commoners. Dishonor could cost him his stipend, his standing, even his swords. But hunger was a sharper enemy than shame. At the market, the noise of bartering filled the air. Fishmongers shouted the day's catch. The smell of grilled mackerel mingled with the sharp scent of pickled daikon. Kenji's stomach twisted. He forced his gaze away from the food stalls and focused on the small crowd gathered near the well. An old merchant, bent nearly double with age, was struggling to lift a heavy sack onto a cart. Kenji stepped forward. "Allow me," he said, bowing slightly. The old man squinted at him. "A samurai doing porter's work?" Kenji's jaw tightened. "Consider it a kindness, not labor," the merchant chuckled and stepped aside. Kenji hoisted the sack with ease and placed it in the cart. The man pressed a copper coin into his palm. Kenji bowed again, slipping the coin into his sleeve before anyone could see. He spent the morning like this, helping where he could, earning a few coins here and there. By midday, his pockets were heavier but his pride lighter. He found a quiet corner near the shrine and bought a rice ball from a vendor, a luxury he had not tasted in 3 days. The first bite was heaven, warm and seasoned with sesame. He closed his eyes, savoring it as though it were a feast. It was then he heard the voice. Kenji Takahiro. He opened his eyes to see a man in the colors of Lord Hayama's household, standing before him. The man's armor gleamed, his face stern. Kenji rose at once and bowed deeply. "Your presence is requested at the castle," the messenger said. Kenji's heart pounded. He had never been summoned directly to the castle before. Was it some honor or punishment? Without another word, he followed the messenger through the market, past the curious eyes of the villagers, and along the road that climbed toward Hayama Castle. The great walls rose ahead, stone upon stone, a fortress of power that seemed to press down on the valley below. Inside, the air was cooler, shaded by towering pines. The sound of his sandals echoed on the polished wooden floors. He was led to a small audience chamber, where Lord Hayama himself sat on a raised platform, his robes rich with embroidery. Kenji knelt, his forehead touching the mat. "Kenji Takahiro," the Lord said, his voice smooth as still water. "Your father served me well. I have a task for you." Kenji's mouth went dry. "My life is yours to command, my lord." "There is trouble in the mountains," Hayama said. "Bandits have been preying on travelers. I will send men to deal with it, but I need someone to go ahead, someone they would not suspect. You are young, unknown, and—" The Lord's gaze lingered on Kenji's worn clothing. "You look like a man of little consequence. That may serve you well." Kenji bowed again. "I will go." The Lord's eyes hardened. "Know this, only 1 in 100 who face these men return alive. If you succeed, you will have proven yourself worthy of your father's name. If you fail—" He did not need to finish. Kenji left the castle with the weight of the task pressing on his shoulders. The road to the mountains was long, and danger waited at every turn. But for the first time in years, he felt something other than hunger or shame. He felt purpose. And for a low-rank samurai in a world where only 1% survived such trials, purpose could be the sharpest weapon of all. The road to the mountain's shadow. The morning after his summons, Kenji stood at the edge of Omiya village, the mist curling like pale smoke around his legs. His swords rested at his side, the steel polished though the scabbards were worn. In a small cloth bag over his shoulder, he carried dried rice, a flask of water, and a single charm, a wooden amulet his mother had pressed into his hand before she passed away. Carved into it were 3 kanji. "Hold your ground." He set his feet toward the northern road. Few traveled this way unless they were desperate or foolish. For beyond the hills lay the mountain passes, where travelers vanished without trace. The stories told in the market stalls spoke of shadows moving in the fog, of cries echoing down the gullies, and of bandits who struck not for gold alone, but for cruel sport. The path wound between pine forests, their needles whispering with every breeze. Kenji's sandals sank into the damp earth, and the smell of moss filled the air. At times, he felt as if unseen eyes followed his every step. His father had once told him that a samurai must learn to feel the weight of the world around him, not just what he could see, but what hid in silence. Today, the silence was heavy. By midday, he reached a small wayside tea house, its paper lanterns swaying. The woman who ran it eyed him carefully as he entered. Her hands shook as she poured him tea, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "You are heading north, aren't you?" she asked. Kenji sipped the bitter tea. "I am." "Then take care. The bandits have grown bold. Last week a merchant's son was taken. They sent his horse back, but not him." Her gaze flicked to his swords. "Steel won't save you if they decide you're worth hunting." Kenji placed a coin on the table and bowed. "Steel is not all I carry." When he stepped back outside, the air felt colder. He pulled his cloak tighter and pressed on. The forest closed in, the sunlight breaking through only in scattered patches. Somewhere in the branches above, a crow cawed, long, drawn out, as if warning him away. By late afternoon, the road narrowed to a rocky trail. Kenji paused at a bend, scanning the cliffs above. It was perfect ground for an ambush, high rocks on one side, steep drop on the other. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his katana. That was when he saw it. A scrap of fabric, crimson against the gray stone, fluttered in the wind. He moved closer, heart tightening. It was the torn sleeve of a kimono, stained dark at the edges. The rocks nearby bore faint smears of blood. He crouched, examining the ground. There were footprints, many, some fresh, some days old. He counted at least 6 men, maybe more, all moving in the same direction deeper into the pass. Kenji's pulse slowed. This was what Lord Hayama had sent him to find. But if the bandits had taken a merchant's son, there was still a chance. As he followed the trail, the sun dipped lower, painting the mountains in deep gold and shadow. He moved carefully now, each step placed with the silence his father had taught him. Soon, the path split, one way leading to a narrow gorge, the other to a ridge overlooking the valley. From the ridge, he might see their camp. He chose the ridge. Climbing the rocks, he kept low, his breath steady. At the top, he froze. Below, in a clearing, smoke rose from a cluster of tents. Men lounged around a fire, their armor mismatched, their laughter sharp and ugly, and near the fire. Kenji's jaw clenched. A young man, his hands bound, sat slumped against a post. The bandits were careless, not expecting anyone to come this far. But Kenji knew better. A direct attack would be suicide. He would need to wait for night when the fire burned low and shadows became his allies. He slipped back from the ridge, finding a small hollow where he could watch unseen. He ate a mouthful of rice, sipped water, and closed his eyes for a brief rest, though his ears stayed tuned to the camp's distant noise. As the sun vanished, the cold bit deeper. The fire below was now a faint orange glow. The bandits' voices grew slurred with drink. Kenji rose, checking his blades in the dim light. His father had always said, "A sword is an extension of your will. If your will is weak, your sword is just metal." Tonight, Kenji's will was sharp as the steel at his hip. He descended toward the camp like a shadow sliding between trees. The first guard he met was slumped against a log, half asleep. Kenji's hand covered the man's mouth before he could cry out, the hilt of his wakizashi striking the side of his head. The body sagged quietly to the ground. Moving from shadow to shadow, Kenji reached the prisoner. The young man's eyes widened as Kenji cut the ropes at his wrists. "Can you walk?" Kenji whispered. The boy nodded weakly, but then a shout split the night. One of the bandits had spotted movement. Torches flared. Kenji's heart pounded as the camp erupted in chaos. He pulled the boy close. "Run when I tell you," he said, drawing his katana. The first attacker came at him with a spear. Kenji sidestepped, the blade flashing in a swift arc. The spear clattered to the ground. Another rushed from the left. Kenji parried, feeling the jolt through his arms. The boy stumbled backward toward the trees. "Now!" Kenji barked, and the boy fled into the darkness. Kenji turned, holding the bandits at bay. They circled him, eyes gleaming in the firelight. Outnumbered, tired, and far from safety, he gripped his sword tighter. If this was the night he would die, he would do so standing, like a samurai. The night of blades and shadows, Kenji's breath came in slow, controlled bursts, each one misting in the cold mountain air. Around him, the firelight flickered against the trunks of the tall pines, sending the shadows of the bandits dancing like restless spirits. He could hear the shouts and curses, voices drawing closer from all sides. The boy he had freed was now somewhere ahead in the darkness, and every heartbeat felt like a gamble on whether the young man would make it to safety, the bull. First bandit lunged again, his eyes wild from drink and rage. Kenji shifted his weight, letting the man's strike slice through empty air before bringing his katana down in a swift, precise motion. The sound was muted, a clean cut, followed by the dull thud of the man collapsing to the frozen earth. But there was no time to linger. Another charged from the left, screaming, his blade raised high. Kenji met him head-on, their swords ringing in the night like temple bells in a storm. The clang of steel echoed through the trees, drawing more enemies. Kenji's arms ached, but his focus sharpened. His father's voice whispered in his mind, "Do not fight their strength. Steal it from them." Kenji let the next attacker's strike slide past, using the man's momentum to send him sprawling. A swift kick to the jaw left the man unmoving. Yet for every one he dropped, two more seemed to emerge from the shadows. The ring around him tightened. He knew he could not cut his way through all of them. He needed to vanish, to become the night itself. His gaze darted to the right, there, a gap between two pines, leading into the thicker woods. Without hesitation, Kenji stepped back, feigning exhaustion. One of the bandits took the bait, rushing forward recklessly. Kenji parried, sidestepped, and in that split second, slipped through the gap and into the dark forest. The cold bit harder here, the moonlight barely piercing the dense branches overhead. He moved swiftly, every step placed to avoid dry leaves or snapping twigs. Behind him, the shouts grew fainter as the forest swallowed the noise. Minutes felt like hours. The weight of exhaustion pressed against his chest, but he pushed forward, driven by the thought of the boy. Somewhere ahead, a faint rustle caught his ear. He slowed, hand on his sword, eyes scanning the shadows. A figure emerged, a small shape hunched beside a fallen log. It was the boy, shivering, his face pale. Relief flooded Kenji, but it lasted only a heartbeat. Behind the boy, two torches flared in the dark, and the sound of boots crunching snow filled the air. Kenji's jaw tightened. They had followed. He stepped forward, placing himself between the boy and the advancing bandits. "Go," he whispered without looking back. "I can't leave you," the boy began. "Go!" Kenji's tone brooked no argument. The boy's footsteps retreated into the forest, swallowed by the wind. The first bandit stepped into the torchlight, a tall man with a jagged scar across his cheek and a grin full of broken teeth. He carried a massive nodachi, the blade glinting in the pale light. Beside him was a smaller man with quick eyes and twin daggers. "You've caused us trouble, samurai," the scarred man said, his voice low and dangerous. "But it ends here." Kenji said nothing. Words would not change what was about to happen. The scarred man attacked first, his nodachi swinging in a deadly arc. Kenji barely avoided the strike, the blade biting deep into the log where the boy had been hiding moments earlier. The smaller man darted in, his daggers flashing like silver snakes. Kenji twisted, blocking one dagger and feeling the other slice across his sleeve, grazing his arm. Pain flared, but it only sharpened his focus. He stepped in close, too close for the nodachi to swing, forcing the scarred man to stumble back. With a swift motion, Kenji drove his hilt into the smaller man's jaw, sending him reeling. The fight became a blur of movement, steel clashing, boots sliding in the frost, breaths coming ragged. At last, Kenji found his opening. The scarred man swung wide, and Kenji's blade flashed in the moonlight, striking true. The nodachi clattered to the ground, and its owner followed, crumpling silently. The smaller man hesitated, eyes darting, from Kenji to the lifeless body of his companion. Then, without a word, he turned and melted into the darkness. Kenji stood there for a moment, chest heaving, the taste of blood and iron in his mouth. His arm throbbed where the dagger had cut. Him and the cold seemed to seep deeper into his bones. But the forest was quiet again. He sheathed his sword and began walking, following the faint trail the boy had taken. Hours passed before he found him crouched beside a stream, cupping his hands in the icy water. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of Kenji. "You came," the boy whispered. "I said I would," Kenji replied simply. The boy smiled weakly. "My name is Haru." "Kenji," he said, offering his hand. In that moment, with the snow falling softly around them, the samurai and the boy understood they were bound together, not by blood, but by the night they had survived. And deep within, Kenji knew this was only the beginning. For in the mountains ahead, worse dangers than bandits waited, the hidden enemy in the mountains. The first light of dawn crept through the pines. casting pale gold over the frozen forest. Kenji stood at the stream's edge, washing the blood from his hands in water so cold it bit into his skin. Beside him, Haru sat huddled in Kenji's spare cloak, still shivering. The boy had not spoken much since the night's events, and Kenji did not press him. Some wounds needed silence before they could bear words. When the sun finally rose high enough to touch the peaks, Kenji glanced at the sky. "We cannot stay here. The bandits will search, and the mountain is not safe." Haru looked up, his voice hesitant. "I thought, after last night, it couldn't get worse." Kenji's gaze swept the tree line. "There are worse things than bandits." They began walking north, deeper into the range. The air grew colder, the silence heavier. Even the birds seemed absent. The path narrowed, twisting between jagged rocks and steep drops. At times, Kenji noticed strange marks on the ground, deep gouges in the frozen earth. Too wide for a sword cut, too irregular for animal claws. By midday, they came upon a ruin, what looked like the remnants of an old watch post, its wooden beams blackened by fire, its stone walls cracked. The place was silent except for the low moan of wind through the gaps. Haru slowed. What happened here? Kenji stepped inside cautiously. The snow inside the ruin was stained in dark patches, old blood frozen hard. Broken arrows littered the ground, their shafts splintered. But what drew Kenji's attention most was the absence of bodies. Whoever had fought here had vanished afterward, friend and foe alike. He knelt, running his fingers over the ash-blackened stones. This was recent. Weeks, maybe days ago. Haru glanced around uneasily. But who? A sound interrupted him. A faint scrape, like stone on stone from somewhere deeper within the ruin. Kenji's hand went to his katana. He motioned for Haru to stay back. He moved slowly toward the sound, stepping over debris. The light dimmed as he entered the far corner of the watch post, where part of the wall had collapsed, revealing a narrow passage sloping downward into darkness. Cold air rushed up from it, carrying a smell that made Kenji's skin prickle, metal, earth, and something else. Something like decay. From the shadows, a voice emerged, hoarse and trembling. "Who is there?" Kenji froze. A figure stepped into the thin light, a man in tattered armor, one arm bound in dirty cloth, eyes sunken deep. His face was pale, his lips cracked, but it was his expression that struck Kenji, a mixture of fear and relief. You must turn back," the man whispered. "You don't understand what hunts here." Kenji's grip on his sword tightened. "Bandits?" The man shook his head violently. "Not bandits. They're only the bait, the real killers. They take both sides. They hide in the fog. You hear them before you see them. By then, it's too late." Before Kenji could question further, the man's eyes widened, staring past him toward the ruin's entrance. His voice dropped to a frantic hiss. "They've found you!" Kenji spun around. The ruin's doorway was now shrouded in a creeping mist, thicker than morning fog, rolling in unnaturally fast. It swirled around the stones, curling into the shadows. A low, rhythmic sound echoed through it, soft at first, then louder. It was like the slow beat of a drum, or perhaps footsteps. Kenji stepped back toward Haru, who was already clutching the cloak tightly around himself. "Stay behind me," he said. Through the mist, a figure appeared. Tall, thin, its head wrapped in a cloth mask. In its hands, it held a long, curved blade unlike any Kenji had seen before. Its edge black, its surface absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. Another figure emerged beside it, and then another, until the ruin's doorway was filled with silent shapes. The man in tattered armor staggered forward, raising a shaking hand. Don't Don't look into their eyes. An arrow hissed through the air, striking him in the chest. He fell without a sound. The figures moved in perfect unison, their steps quiet, their blades glinting faintly in the fog. Kenji's heart pounded, but his mind remained clear. He had faced ambushes before, but this was different. These were not common killers. There was discipline in their movement, a precision that spoke of long training. Whoever they were, they had turned the mountain into a hunting ground. Kenji raised his sword. "Haru, when I move, you run." "No." "Run!" Kenji barked, and as the masked figures advanced, he charged. Steel met steel, the impact ringing through the cold air. The black blade was heavier than he expected, forcing him to adjust his stance. The second figure struck from the side, but Kenji ducked low, sweeping his leg to unbalance the attacker. He pivoted, striking the first across the chest, but instead of falling, the figure stepped back, seemingly unfazed. They were testing him. Haru bolted into the trees as ordered, the fog curling after him like grasping hands. Kenji cut through another swing, backing toward the forest himself. He knew he couldn't fight them all here, not in their ground, not with the mist stealing his sight. He broke into a sprint, weaving between trees, the sound of pursuit close behind. Branches whipped his face, roots threatened to trip him, but he did not slow. Somewhere ahead, Haru's silhouette appeared through the haze. When they finally burst into a clearing, the sun was dipping low again, and the fog stopped at the tree line as if blocked by some unseen barrier. Kenji bent over, catching his breath, his mind racing. Whatever those things were, they weren't bandits. They were something far more dangerous, something that explained why only 1 in 100 survived these mountains. And now, Kenji knew. They had seen his face. The village. That shouldn't exist. The clearing was silent except for the sound of their breathing. Kenji stood with his sword still drawn, eyes fixed on the tree line where the fog had stopped. Haru sat in the frost-covered grass, shivering but alive. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Haru's voice broke the stillness. "They didn't follow us." Kenji's gaze didn't waver. "Not here. They can't." "Why not?" Kenji shook his head. "I don't know. But something in that forest belongs to them, and something here keeps them out." The sun was low now, casting long shadows over the mountains. They couldn't stay in the open. Kenji sheathed his blade and motioned for Haru to follow. "Come. We find shelter before night." They crossed the clearing and followed a narrow animal trail that wound between low hills. The air here felt different, still cold, but lighter, almost watchful. Kenji's instincts told him they were not alone, yet he sensed no danger. As the light began to fade, the trail curved around a ridge and opened into a wide valley. Haru gasped. There, nestled between the slopes, was a village. But something was wrong. The houses stood in neat rows, their thatched roofs intact, their wooden walls untouched by rot. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, and yet not a single figure moved among them. Kenji slowed, his hand brushing the hilt of his sword. "Stay behind me." They entered the main street. The snow here was undisturbed. No footprints, no wheel tracks, no signs of life. The doors were closed, the windows shuttered. The only sound was the faint creak of a loose sign swaying in the bus. Wind. Kenji stopped at the first house and knocked. No answer. He slid the door open. Inside, the room was perfectly ordered. A low table stood with cups arranged neatly as if waiting for tea. A child's wooden toy lay in the corner. But there was dust on everything, a thin layer that spoke of years untouched. Haru's voice was hushed. "Where are they?" Kenji stepped back outside. The other houses were the same, tidy, untouched, but abandoned. It was as if the people had simply vanished in a single breath. At the far end of the village stood a small shrine, its red torii gate bright against the white snow. Kenji felt drawn to it. He climbed the stone steps, Haru trailing behind. Inside the shrine, the air was warmer. A single candle burned on the altar, though there was no sign of who had lit it. In front of the candle lay a scroll, bound with a strip of faded cloth. Kenji hesitated, then picked it up and unrolled it. The ink was old but clear. To those who enter this valley, you are safe here only because the pact holds. Beyond the fog, the hunters wait. They are not men as you know them. They do not age. They do not forget a face. If you cross them, they will follow you until you are gone from this earth. The first of them came from our own blood, trained in the arts we once called sacred. Now they kill in silence for those who command the mountain. Remember, the fog is their veil, and your fear is their weapon. Kenji's eyes narrowed. Our own blood. The words stirred something in him, an unease that clawed at his chest. Kenji, Haru whispered. He was standing at the shrine's side, wall, staring at a faded mural painted there. Kenji stepped closer. The mural showed a group of masked figures, their black blades raised. Behind them stood a man without a mask, tall, with the same narrow eyes and straight jawline that Kenji saw every day in his own reflection. Beneath the figure was a name written in bold strokes. Takahiro Daiichi. Kenji's breath caught. His father. The Pao? World seemed to tilt. His father had died with honor, serving Lord Hayama, or so Kenji had been told his entire life. But here, in a forgotten village, was a painting linking him to the very killers who stalked these mountains. Haru looked between the mural and Kenji. What? What does it mean? Kenji didn't answer. His hands tightened into fists. If this was true, then everything he had believed, every lesson, every promise, was built on a lie. Before he could speak, the candle on the altar flickered and went out, plunging the shrine into shadow. From outside, the sound of a bell rang, a slow, deliberate chime. Kenji's pulse quickened. We need to leave. But as they stepped outside, they saw movement at the far end of the street. Figures were emerging from the fog at the valley's edge, masked, silent, advancing. And Kenji knew, with a cold certainty, that they had not only followed him here, they had come because of who he was. The pact is broken. The masked figures moved slowly into the valley, their black blades glinting faintly in the pale light. They should not have been able to cross the invisible line that held them back before, but they had. Kenji felt the weight of the moment settle in his chest. Whatever protection this place had offered was gone. Haru's voice trembled. You said they couldn't come here. Kenji didn't take his eyes off them. They couldn't. Something has changed. The wind carried the sound of their steps, measured, silent, but heavy, like the march of a funeral procession. The fog they brought with them began to roll into the empty streets, swallowing the village's neat rows of houses. Kenji stepped forward, drawing his katana. His father's name on the mural still burned in his mind. If these killers were tied to Takahiro Daiichi, then they might have come not for the boy, but for him. The lead figure stopped just a few paces away, tilting his head slightly as if studying Kenji. Then, in a voice low and calm, he spoke through the mask. You carry his blood. Kenji's grip tightened on the sword. Who? The figure took another step forward. Daiichi, the one who forged the first pact, the one who broke it. Haru looked up sharply at Kenji. Your father? Kenji didn't answer. His pulse was a steady drum in his ears. Why are you here? The figure's tone remained calm, almost polite. The pact kept this valley untouched for generations. In exchange, the people gave us those who strayed too far into the fog, but your father broke that order. He freed one who was meant to die. Now the debt must be paid. The others behind him raised their blades in unison. Kenji moved. His katana flashed in the cold light, meeting the first strike with a sharp clang that sent a shiver down his arms. Haru darted toward the shrine for cover, clutching the wooden amulet Kenji had given him. The fight was unlike any Kenji had faced before. These were not drunken bandits or untrained thieves. They were fast, disciplined, their strikes precise, and relentless. Every parry sent shocks up his wrists. Every dodge was a hair's breadth from death. He cut one across the arm, but the man didn't cry out, just stepped back and adjusted his stance, as if pain was nothing to him. Another came at him from the side, and Kenji spun, letting his momentum carry his blade through the attacker's mask. The figure dropped, the black blade clattering on the frozen ground. But there were too many. They moved like a tide, pressing him back toward the shrine. Haru was crouched just inside the doorway, his eyes wide with terror. Kenji's breath came in sharp bursts now, his muscles burning. His father's voice echoed in his mind. A samurai does not fight to live. He fights so others may live. Haru, he shouted. When I give the word, run for the ridge. I won't leave you. You will, Kenji snapped. That's an order. The lead figure advanced again, his black blade sweeping in a slow arc. You fight well, Kenji Takahiro. Perhaps you are worthy of your father's place among us. Kenji's jaw tightened. I will never be one of you. The man's tone didn't change. Then you will die here, and the boy with you. Something inside Kenji hardened. With a sudden surge, he stepped forward, slamming his shoulder into the man's chest and sending him off balance. He spun, striking two others in quick succession, his blade finding the gaps in their armor. Haru, now! The boy bolted from the shrine, sprinting toward the ridge. The masked killers moved to pursue, but Kenji threw himself in their path, his sword flashing in a blur of steel. One blade caught him across the ribs, pain flaring white-hot, but he didn't stop. He cut down another, then another, until the snow was stained dark around them. The lead figure recovered, stepping in close. Their swords locked, faces just inches apart. Through the mask's slits, Kenji saw cold, unreadable eyes. You fight like him, the man said softly. But you still do not understand him. Kenji gritted his teeth and shoved the man back, breaking the lock. Then tell me, what was he? The man tilted his head. A hunter, the best of us, until he betrayed the mountain. The words landed, like a strike to Kenji's chest. His father, a hunter? The same men who killed without mercy, who haunted the fog? Before he could ask more, the man stepped back into the mist, and as if by some signal, the others did the same. In moments, the fog began to retreat, leaving only the bodies of the fallen and the ragged sound of Kenji's breathing. He staggered toward the ridge, his hand pressed to his side where blood seeped through his hakama. Haru was waiting there, his face pale. They just left, Haru said, voice trembling. Kenji looked back at the village, now eerily still once more. No, they'll be back, and next time, they won't leave without what they came for. Haru swallowed hard. What did they come for? Kenji tightened his grip on his sword. Me. And with that, he turned away from the valley, leading Haru into the mountains once more. He didn't know how long they could run, or if they could ever truly escape. But he knew one thing. If only 1% survived life as a low-rank samurai, in these mountains, he would make sure they were in that 1%, blood in the fog. The mountain wind was colder now, biting through Kenji's cloak as he and Haru moved along a narrow ridge. The peaks loomed on either side, their snow caps glowing faintly under a sky thick with rolling clouds. It had been 2 days since the hunters broke the pact and came into the valley, and in that time, Kenji had not slept more than a few breaths at a time. The cut along his ribs burned with every movement, but he kept going. Haru followed close, his face pale and drawn. "Where are we going?" "To the only place they won't expect us to go," Kenji said. Haru frowned. "Which is?" Kenji didn't look back. "Their home." The boy stumbled on a loose stone. "That's suicide." Kenji's voice was steady. "No. It's the only way to end this. If they want me because of my father, then I will face them and learn the truth. Only then will we be free." The trail narrowed until it was barely wider than his foot. Below, the fog shifted in the valleys, a living thing that seemed to breathe. Kenji remembered the mural in the abandoned village. His father standing among the hunters, maskless, as if he belonged to both worlds. By nightfall, they reached a cliffside path that led into a cavern mouth black as ink. The air here was heavy, thick with the scent of damp stone and something older, an iron tang that brought memories of blood. Kenji lit a small oil lamp from his pack, its flicker casting long shadows. Inside, the cavern walls were carved with figures, samurai kneeling before masked warriors, chains binding their wrists. The deeper they went, the more the carvings changed. Men becoming masked themselves, their eyes vanishing into shadow. At the end of the tunnel, the space opened into a great hall lit by braziers. Dozens of masked hunters stood in silence, their black blades crossed before them. At the far end, seated upon a raised platform, was the man Kenji had fought in the valley, the one who had spoken of his father. Kenji stepped forward, every muscle tense. "I came for answers." The man's voice was calm. "Then you will have them, but only if you can bear them." He removed his mask. Kenji froze. The man's face was weathered but strong, his eyes sharp and steady. And though older, the resemblance was unmistakable. It was his father. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of his own heartbeat. "You died," Kenji whispered. "No," Daiichi said, his voice low. "I became something else." The hall seemed to tilt as Kenji's father stood descending the steps. "I served Lord Hayama faithfully, but the mountain serves no lord. Here, the pact rules. It kept the villages safe by giving the hunters what they demanded, the condemned, the criminals, the wandering fools. And yes, sometimes, the innocent, if they crossed the fog." Kenji's hands trembled. "You killed for them?" "I killed so the rest could live," Daiichi said. "But the day I freed a boy meant to die. The pact was broken. I became the hunted. And so will you." Kenji's voice was tight. "You could have told me. All my life I thought you died with honor." His father's eyes softened. "I died to you the moment I put on the mask." The silence between them was broken by the sound of boots. More hunters entered, surrounding the hall. Their leader, another older figure with a mask carved from bone, spoke. "The blood debt must be paid. The son stands in the father's place." Daiichi stepped in front of Kenji. "Then take me instead." The elder's voice was like stone. "Too late. The fog saw him. He belongs to us now." Kenji's hand went to his sword, but his father caught his wrist. "If you fight them all, Haru dies too. There is only one way." Kenji met his eyes. "What way?" Daiichi's voice dropped to a whisper. "I challenge them to the trial. One fight. If I win, you both leave alive. If I lose, my blood ends here." The elder agreed. The hunters formed. A wide circle, the braziers casting their shadows high on the cavern walls. Father and son stood side by side, but only one would fight. Daiichi drew his own black blade, its edge dark and deadly. Kenji wanted to speak, to stop him, but Daiichi only said, "Hold your ground." The duel began. Daiichi moved with the precision of a man who had survived 100 battles. His strikes were quick, his defenses flawless. The elder met him, blow for blow, their blades sparking in the firelight. Every clash echoed through the hall like a drumbeat of fate. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, with a feint and a sudden twist, Daichi drove his blade through the elder's guard, stopping just short of the killing blow. The elder froze, then slowly lowered his weapon. "The debt is paid," he said. Kenji and Haru were allowed to leave, but as they stepped into the cold night air, Kenji turned to see his father still standing in the hall, the mask in his hand. "Come, with us," Kenji said. Daichi shook his head. "The mountain still needs its keeper, and I have been its prisoner too long." Kenji's throat tightened, but he bowed deeply. "Then I will live so your choice means something." His father's last words followed him into the darkness. "Survive, Kenji, even if you are the last one." And as Kenji led Haru down the trail, the first light of dawn broke over the peaks. The 1% who survived were not the strongest, nor the fastest. They were the ones who carried the weight of the mountain and kept walking.